What a pleasure to welcome Premier Ford to Ottawa. Opportunity for us to sit down and talk together about a lot of shared priorities, actually.
It's a pleasure to be here with the Prime Minister and come here to set up the priorities, shared priorities that we both feel that we can move forward in Ontario. And I've always said, a lot of the people that voted for the Prime Minister, not all, but a lot of them voted for me, and people expect us to work together. And our people too.
Outstanding.
Shoulder pats, smiles, laughter, agreement. A lot has changed since the federal election campaign when Justin Trudeau invoked Doug Ford's name over and over and over again. Today, the Prime Minister and the Premier of Ontario struck a new tone, as you heard there, in what Ford called a phenomenal meeting. The Premier emerged from it to say they're committed to uniting the country following a regionally divided election result.
We have to send a message around the world that yes, we're a big family, and we may have a few bumps in the road, we may disagree, but we have to give businesses out there certainty. Because if you don't give businesses certainty, they'll leave. They'll leave and they'll invest in other areas, and we want them to stay here. And it's absolutely critical, we unite the country and we stick together.
To that effect, earlier this week, the Premier announced the creation of a new council on provincial-federal relations that will look, he says, to strengthen the relationship between Ontario and Ottawa. Peter Bethlenfalvy is on that council. He's the president of the Ontario Treasury Board and joins us now from Queen's Park. Hi, Minister Bethlenfalvy. Great to see you. Thanks for making time for us.
Vashi, always good to be here.
Before I ask you about the work of the council, I have to also ask you, is the change of heart we saw on display from the Premier today genuine?
100%. I have the privilege of working with Premier Doug Ford day in, day out. We sit together in cabinet, and I've gotten to know him, and he's really committed to getting things done. There's always a lot of dialogue, but he's very focused on getting things done, so this is very in character for the Premier.
What has prompted the change of heart? And I think back to, you'll understand, I think, the question when you think back to December of 2018 when Premier Ford was posing for the cover of Maclean's along with Premier Moe, Kenny, Pallister and Scheer, calling themselves the Resistance. Is your government still the Resistance?
The resistance to, obviously the resistance to not creating jobs, not building transit, getting things done, absolutely. Now politics is politics and you duke it out, but
that cover, with respect, that cover was not about politics. That was specifically about the resistance to the policies of the federal government. Does your government no longer resist those policies?
Vashi, you're going back in time. I can't even remember what I did last week. I can tell you that
it was a pretty famous
played
cover.
The clip, and we're dealing with the situation now where there's a very constructive tone. The Premier has shown leadership, I think, very clearly on the post the election in terms of some of the disunity across the country. He's very sincere about trying to play a national role, and focus on areas where we can agree. And we're a big family, and I think that's what we in Ontario got elected to do. I think that's what the Prime Minister got elected to do, and so we're going to work on things of common interest together.
Does the new constructive tone and the change of heart extend to the resistance shown to the federal carbon tax?
I think, as we said before, we'll have some differences. The message that I think is very clear out of today's meeting, both from the Prime Minister and the Premiers, to work on things that matter, where we can work together. Things like infrastructure and the transit and getting things done here in Ontario. Focusing on healthcare. We have an aging population, not just in Ontario, but across the country. And of course, job creation. We want to have good quality jobs. We want to fill those jobs. So there's a lot of areas of good common interest that we can work together.
Can I zone in on one of the items that you identified, and that's around healthcare? I've heard members of your government, I think it was Minister Phillips came on the show a few weeks ago talking about the ask being from your government for an increase in the amount of transfer that comes, in the escalator basically, every year, the amount of money that's transferred from the federal government to the provincial government where healthcare is concerned. What specifically is the ask being made? Did the Premier raise it with the Prime Minister today?
Yeah, one of the areas is around healthcare. Clearly, the Council of Federation has tabled a 5.2% increase, recognizing that we have an aging population. and that the pressures are on the healthcare system, not just here in Ontario, but across the country. So again, I don't think that's ideology, that's just math, and we've got to work together because that's what every provincial government got elected to do. That's what the federal government got elected to do, and healthcare clearly is a priority for all of us.
Yeah, I just want, is that a consensus among all the provincial governments? Is that what is going to be the ask of the federal government specifically from the table writ large?
As I understand it, that was tabled at the Council of Federation, and that is the 5.2% number is out there. Again, there's much to discuss. The Premier did reach out to Chairman Scott Moe of Saskatchewan to host the meeting in Toronto, and in fact they agreed. So we'll be meeting here in a couple of weeks, and healthcare will be on the table. Let
me ask you about the council that you now sit on, this council that was announced by the Premier earlier this week. Is it necessary? My understanding is it's about improving the relationship between the federal government and your government. Don't Ontarians already expect your two governments to work together?
Oh, absolutely they do, but there's many a slip between cup and lip. I mean, it's one thing to say that you're going to work together. It's another thing to actually have results. One example, of course, is the Ontario Relief Line and the Transit Plan, $28.5 billion that the Premier and the Mayor, John Tory, announced together, and working with the federal government because, we have one taxpayer, we don't have three, and we have to work together. And I think the people really want us to get things done. So I think that's the message here, that you can't boil the ocean, you can't do 100 things. Focus on the things where you can work together, the priorities of mutual interest, and that would be an example in the infrastructure transit space, but clearly healthcare and job creation are two other core areas.
I remember interviewing a number of ministers from various portfolios over the last year, let's say, and there are a couple of areas where you would have thought there would already be that kind of cooperation. I'm thinking, for example, of money that was directed towards immigration services to help Toronto deal with an influx of people who are seeking asylum and sheltering them, or where legal aid is concerned. In both those instances, the federal government ended up going around the provincial government and working specifically with the cities because they said, according to them, your government was being obstructive. What will be different this time around? Is that going to change? Is now the federal government going to go through the Ontario government before giving that kind of money out?
What's changed is clearly what you saw this morning. The Prime Minister and the Premier saying that they're going to work together. We are going to work together because that's what people expect us to do. But we've got to roll up our sleeves. I mean, it's not like everything is going to happen tomorrow. I will tell you there's lots of areas where we've been working with the federal government in infrastructure, a number of shared infrastructure programs in the Green Stream and the community and recreation centers, a bunch of applications with the federal government where we're working together. Mental health and addiction, we're working together with the federal government, have been working. I've got a commitment there because that's a priority for Ontarians and Canadians. So I think what's changed is what you saw, and what we're promising to do is to try to get things done because that's what people expect from us.
I guess with respect, should Ontarians believe you? Because even the items you're talking about right now, I can remember doing interviews with the provincial and federal ministers on infrastructure who were both saying on the subway line, well, we didn't get the right application. Well, we gave them the application. They should be funding us without the contents of the details of the project. I just wonder, is this just because you've realized that the Prime Minister has a mandate, that all of a sudden your government is willing to work on these things? Because 6 months ago, it really wasn't like this.
Well, I would say to your viewers, I would say, there's obviously always politics and there's always positioning, but you should measure both governments around getting things done. And the infrastructure and the transit is an area where we are working together and getting things done. And there's much to do.
Does your government, though, regret the level of politics that were employed by your government in all of this? Do you feel like you were too political about it in the past?
I never regret getting things done. And I think, if you look at a whole range of areas, on broadband, on highways, on public transportation, there's many areas where we're actually getting things done, so no regrets there.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you, Mr. Bethlenfalvy. Appreciate your time as always.
Thank you as always, Vashi.
That's Peter Bethlenfalvy, President of the Ontario Treasury Board from Toronto.
There's family's been in politics for years. Our family's been in politics for years. It's politics. Now we have to do things that people want. People expect us to work together. I thought it was a phenomenal meeting. I really do.
Letting bygones be bygones, that's what Ontario Premier Doug Ford seemed to be saying today after his meeting with the Prime Minister here in Ottawa. Justin Trudeau invoked the Ford name you'll remember daily during the election campaign to try and tar federal Conservative leader Andrew Scheer with the low approval ratings of the Ontario government and the Premier himself. But today it seems all of that was forgotten, with both men talking about the need to come together over shared priorities for the country. So is all the bad blood really in the past? Time to bring in the Power Panel to weigh in Toronto tonight. Winnipeg Free Press columnist Neegan Sinclair and Marty Patrican right next to him, Quebec correspondent for The Logic. Here with me in studio, the Globe and Mail's Marika Walsh, and right next to her, the CBC's own Erin Wary. Hello, everyone.
Hey there.
Nice to see you. Marika, I'm going to start with you because you covered the Premier for so long. What an amazing change of heart on display today. Phenomenal, he described the meeting. There were laughs to be had. It was. Is it genuine?
I actually think it is, because I think we've seen a genuine change in tone from the Premier, not just today, but really actually throughout the election. The fact that Doug Ford was able to control himself and not punch back when Justin Trudeau made him a target every single day in virtually every press conference and rally, I think says that the Premier's office is very serious about resetting. And I think this comes at a really interesting time, because in many ways, both of these leaders are resetting, right? Justin Trudeau is coming back from a majority to a minority government. Doug Ford is trying to pivot from a pretty difficult first year and to kind of correct course in Ontario. And so I think they are both seeing that they need each other at this point.
I wonder, though, Neegan, how much of it is a bit of revisionist history as well. We had Peter Bethlenfalvy on the show earlier, the president of the Treasury Board. I mean, it was just 2 years ago that Doug Ford was posing on the cover of Maclean's as a member of the quote-unquote resistance. And it wasn't just that they were the rhetoric involved over the last 2 years. I mean, there were genuine issues where they really butted heads on, even infrastructure, which will now be a shared priority, right? So how genuine do you think it is?
I think this is a perfect example of you keep your enemies closer, and I think this is a situation where they need each other. You've got the oddest couple of all needing each other in the most ironic of ways. I agree in that they both politically need each other at this point, but frankly, the first sign of trouble, and this couple will be broken up, you can almost hear the knives being sharpened into each other's backs as they turned away, and the smiles were so forced, it was almost as if they were, it's almost like an overcompensation. Whenever you ever see Doug Ford grabbing the Prime Minister's hand and almost hugging him on every turn that he can make. I mean, when it comes to the carbon tax and when it comes to a situation involving anything involving infrastructure, transfer payments, this is going to come apart, and it's going to become even more turned towards Alberta, for example, and the Conservative bloc that's going from Quebec all the way to Alberta will continue to be unified.
On the other hand, Doug Ford sort of presented himself today, Marty, as a guy who gets politics, right? And the Prime Minister sometimes might present himself in the same way. Like, is there the possibility that they get that invoking each other's names during each of their campaigns nonstop as being a bad thing is not necessarily a bad thing?
Yeah, there's a certain aspect of, and a lot of politics for me is professional wrestling, in that you have to have boogeyman, you have to have boogeymans on either side, right? But to be perfectly frank, I don't think what we saw today, it is the world's worst sitcom. I see it less as a reflection of their renewed relationship than I do with it, Mr. Ford thumbing his nose at the Conservative Party. During the election.
No meeting with Mr. Scheer today.
Absolutely.
Well, exactly. So you had a situation during the election where the Conservative Party was like, this guy's an albatross. Let's chain him in a box, Houdini-like, and throw him into Lake Ontario for a month and a half. And then, because that's our key to winning Ontario. Lo and behold, they did not win in Ontario. So it lets Ford come out and go. It lets Ford do two things. It let him come out and go, look, like, change that narrative and go, if I'd been around, maybe you would have won the 905. First of all. Second of all, it would have said, they basically, because of what the Conservatives did to Ford has about this much fealty for the Conservative Party right now. And so it is to his utmost advantage to pretend to be really, really close to Justin Trudeau. So again, yes, it's all politics, but I think it's more of a reflection of how bad things are between the federal and the Ontario Conservatives.
Just imagine how this is being played in Alberta, for example. I mean, what does this look like in Alberta today?
Yeah, for
Although they have
Ford,
their-
that's true.
Yeah, they have another meeting going on there, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit later. Aaron, the other thing that stuck out to me was when Premier Ford said, a lot of the same people voted for you who voted for me. Not all of them, but a lot of the same ones. I thought that was an interesting comment, too.
Yeah, I think that's a large part of what you saw today. One of the big reasons, maybe the primary reason the Liberals did as well as they did in Ontario, is because they campaigned against Doug Ford, and Doug Ford is deeply unpopular in Ontario. And if you're Doug Ford looking at the Liberal result in this election, you're going, I need to get some of those people back on my side. I need to up my game. I need to sort of grow my popularity back out. So maybe, making friends with Justin Trudeau sort of looks good on those swing voters who, that pool of voters who, as confusing as it may seem, would vote for both Doug Ford and Justin Trudeau. I think, though, that where the sort of rubber hits the road on this is he's not backing off his carbon tax legal challenge, and so that will continue to persist as an aggravating factor here. And I think the other question is, if there's a fight over equalization, if we get into a big debate about equalization, where does Doug Ford go on any debate on that? Does he side with the West in some way? Does he line up with Jason Kenney and Scott Moe and say they have a reasonable complaint here? Or does he sort of stay neutral on that? That's, for all of the sort of glad handing, for as much as I think there is something to be said for Doug Ford finding common cause with Justin Trudeau right now, there are any number of issues that are going to emerge over the next 2 years where it could split apart pretty easily.
I mean, the basic question is, Marika, right now, how strong is that resistance, quote unquote?
Right, exactly. And I look, this all comes down to money. The Ford government spent the last year fighting with Trudeau and railing against him on all these different levels, and the rhetoric was incredibly heated, and they didn't get anything done on money. Not even the infrastructure money was flowing. That's like the last thing to dry up. Ford needs money from the feds for subways, for other infrastructure. He wants more money for healthcare. So I think they're trying something new. Whether it works out, how long this piece lasts, I think is anybody's guess. But they're trying a new approach, it seems.
Sorry, I think either Marty or Nigan was trying to jump in there. Go for it.
No, I was gonna say Aaron's point about equalization is an interesting one. Particularly, of course, Ford is more of an ideologically closer to the premiers out west. That said, Ontario has vacillated from have to have not status over the last couple of years, over the last few years, and so it's a very good point. Like, which side do you go on that? And that would be a key issue. If he was to side with the status quo, that is to say, Quebec continues getting all the money from Alberta. That's how the narrative goes. That would put a lot of discord between the West and Ontario.
But Trudeau's put a frame around the equalization. I think that in some ways is strategically smart. He's said, come to me when you all have agreement on something.
But
and I think that makes it difficult for this to really go very far.
That's exactly it. It's the most disingenuous thing in the world to say, okay, you come in when you have an agreement, knowing full well they never agree on anything.
Exactly.
They'll never agree on anything.
So,
the other thing I would point out, and Nigan, I'll give you the last word here.
I think this is absolutely just about.
Yeah, go for it. I just wanted to quickly point out that I've asked actually a number of his ministers whether or not they would be open to changes in the equalization formula, and they avoid answering the question completely and always spin it towards healthcare transfers.
Exactly. This is all about public image. This is all about like we can't forget that Manitoba Premier Brian Pallister came across as rather nationalistic, rejecting the separation or the Wexit discord that was coming up that kind of came and went. I mean, I think Doug Ford sees a part of that as being kind of this national conciliator, which he would love to change his public image.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.